Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I'm very proud to come and help out celebrate this 100-year anniversary of the first shovel of dirt tore out of the ground for the Kittitas Reclamation District. A little bit about myself. I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian. My family came here in the territorial era, but it's on the west side. They built sailing ships. But my ties to irrigation, just like most of us, we don't maybe realize, goes back quite a ways. My grandfather used to work for Boeing during World War II, the big one. And all that climate over there west side got to him, so they said, well, you need to go somewhere drier. Well, he went and worked, and he got an 18-acre orchard in Omak, and they farmed there until the big freeze of 1948, 49, and 49, 50 that killed all the apple trees. Then he moved down to Freda. Well, of course, there in Omak, he was on Okanagan Project, which is another reclamation project, water up there on Robinson Flat. And then my grandfather went down to Freda and helped build the Columbia Motel. And of course, that was a big time of the Columbia Basin Project in 1950, opening Columbia Basin Valley in 52. And then my grandfather built the Woluwe Watermasters headquarters. That was an interesting story. He's not alive today. I wish I could ask him, because he ended up with he did a partnership with two other gentlemen, and he ended up with their houses because they couldn't float the money to complete the job. He built the Watermaster headquarters, and then my grandfather got out of that and went to work for the Irrigation District in 1960 when they switched from reclamation control to the Irrigation District, was secretary until the late 70s. So we're all touched by water. I now live in Montana, and sure enough, I'm touched by water because all around me are irrigation projects on the eastern front of the Rockies. They're irrigating some of the largest barley fields in the nation, called the Golden Triangle. So today we're going to talk about, we don't have all, yes.
Did you say your name?
Kelsey Doncaster.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. We don't have all the pomp and circumstance. I'm excited to tell you what happened 100 years ago. We're going to learn about that today on the 100-year anniversary of the Kittitas Reclamation District. Let's see that. Use it. Yeah. Oh, I got technical difficulties here. Oh, we can see the logo. Got that.
Escape of the shoe.
Here we go. Okay, so just a little background, what we're talking about, the Kittitas Reclamation District today is part of the Yakima project, and those of you who are here at my 2 o'clock will be a little bit familiar with this. The Yakima project is the second largest irrigation project in Washington State. It's composed of 5 different divisions, actually 6, I should say, with including the storage division, but 5 big irrigation districts. And it irrigates 474,000 acres in the Yakima and Kittitas Valley. That's the green you see here, green here. All these green spots, that's part of that. And then the 6th division of it is the storage division, so all the lakes up here. So you have the Seattle, you got Lake Leon and Hitchie's Lake and Ketch's Lake. You have Bumping Lake down here, and you have Rimrock here, and Little Clear Lake. So this all was part of the United States Reclamation Service. Now, the history of Carnegie goes back before this in parts. And so what we see in the West is the development of private irrigation districts, because land with water is productive, and without water can't do a whole lot. And the early part of the 1900s, in the late 1800s, you had private irrigation districts that come along, and they would build projects, and they would put forth to irrigate the land. So they really needed big, massive projects to irrigate the arid West. So there were lots of people who petitioned for the creation of the Reclamation Act. One of those was Senator Wesley Jones from North Yakima, now Yakima today. And they had Teddy Roosevelt sign their legislation and persuasion, signed the Newlands Act called Reclamation Act in 1902 to reclaim the arid West. And so it devised projects within 17 Western states identified that needed to be built first. The first one was the Newlands Project, hence the name of the document. But there were quite a few those first few years, and one of those here was the Yakima project, which was approved in 1905, but it took over 50 years to complete. It was moved to 1958. As I mentioned, 6 irrigation divisions, Titus and Science Side, Kittitas, right? Rosa, Kennewack, and a storage division, which proposed 6 dam reservoirs. And this project was the largest in Washington State prior to the Twin Basin project, which is huge. It was planned to be 2 million acres, not that much now, but it is. As we talked about before the Kittitas division started, we had various forms of irrigation here in the Yakima Valley. As I mentioned, I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian. I grew up in Yakima. The Yakima Valley was one of those 2 children born at St. Elizabeth Hospital. That doesn't exist anymore. That's all gone. Yakima used to have 2 hospitals. But the tribes that form the Yakima Nation today, there's all these different bands, parts of tribes, they did practice irrigation, but of a different sort of sub-irrigation before Euro-Americans came. And when they built the Northern Pacific Railway coming through here on the Cascade Branch, which goes over Stampede Pass, they encountered a bunch of sub-irrigation canals and whatnot in the area around the lower Yakima Valley, right there where Union Gap is. And I know they use them here. And so one of the largest person who really captured the dream of the sub-irrigation to help produce more crops and crops abundantly is I'm pronouncing him Chief Alhai. And he was part of the tribe, and he was stories go back more than I think Kamiakin is his nephew. Not sure on that. I was talking to City about that. There seems to be some discrepancy as to where all that image falls. But anyways, they did that first, and then you have the Euro-Americans started coming through in the 1860s into the Kittitas Valley, and then Walter A. Bull, he built a ditch in 1869, delivered waters from Lanham Creek to Coleman Creek, followed by C.P. Cook, who built a ditch in 1870. Large farm near Coleman Creek. 1872, we have a Natchez Canal dug out of the earth by hand labor to irrigate 1,700 acres in the Natchez Canal. 1873, we have the Tiemann Ditch Company founded a 9-mile long canal with horses and scrapers along with hand labor. So they're a little more advanced, you see, with some horses and scrapers, probably Fresno scrapers, to irrigate 3,700 acres near Thorpe. In 1885, we have Ellensburg Water Company's Town Ditch, which eventually irrigate 15,000 acres. In 1889, we have the West Side Irrigation Company Canal, was founded to irrigate those areas west of the Yakima River. This is a quote from Tatum Canyon to where it joins the Yakima to the base of Natchez Canyon. This canal was 14 miles long and 12 feet wide, so this is much bigger than the earlier ones came along. By 1890, there were 25,000 acres irrigated primarily around Ellsburg, and much more in the Yakima Valley, but this is just in the Kittitas Valley. These early systems were all private irrigation ditches owned by farmers who built them cooperatively, except for the Ellsburg Water Company ditch and the West Side Irrigation Company. Nonetheless, irrigation continued to grow as by 1900 the number of acres irrigated was now at 43,373. The growth of irrigation continually necessitated larger and more engineered complex systems as the easy to irrigate lands had already been taken. Ground was broken near Thorpe in 1903 from construction of the 43-mile long Cascade Canal to irrigate lands all the way down the Kittitas Valley to Badger Pocket. And please check out the exhibit over here that Sadie has put up. The new one has stuff on the Cascade Canal and also the Kittitas Reclamation District. We're checking out. But the higher lands were still dry and dusty and covered in rabbit brush and sagebrush, like we see here. So they had irrigated the stuff inside the Kittitas Valley, but all the bench lands, the high lands had not been irrigated. They're still dry and dusty. Now, this is what I had found. Again, I'm open always. If someone has the information to share, please do. History's not stagnant. History is always, new things are being revealed, new things come to light over time. So in 1885, the earliest records for the Highline construction indicated a proposal to take water out of the Tennessee River. In 1889, county commissioners appropriated funds for a survey beginning near Easton. In 1902 to 1903, Reclamation Service investigated a highline canal in the Kittitas Valley, actually even longer than that, down here to Rosa and all the way down to Kennewick. In 1909, now we have the United States Reclamation Service Yakima project. Engineer H. Baldwin revisited the Kittitas Valley. Baldwin conducted more preliminary surveys and discovered a viable location for a diversion dam on the Yakima River above Easton for an irrigation system. So now we're going all the way up through that, and it is interesting. I also want to note in this talk, as a historian, when I worked for the United States Bureau of Reclamation, it was interesting to see the lexicon and the names that are associated with various canals. I want to make sure I give a vote to those local folks here. This is also called the Highline Canal. A lot of people refer to the Kittitas Reclamation District as the Highline Canal System. And that's something that you see early on, the newspapers are circulating that, and it's very interesting. Ellensburg is a really unique place, the Kittitas Valley is unique, that name kind of stuck. Because you have other places where they had already names that went away. For example, the Rosa Canal, it was also called the High Line Canal, but nobody in the lower Yakima Valley ever calls that today. It's always just the Rosa Canal. But here in Ellensburg, in Kittitas Valley, they still call it the High Line Canal. And so it's just something I want to make sure I acknowledge that that's what that is. That's the system. So while KRD was formed in September 25th, 1911, the fieldwork started earlier. Found this article here, a petition being circulated today. And this is from July 7th, 1911, so here were many months before. And it's a committee presenting a petition to the Kittitas County Board of Commissioners. And quote, praying for an election to make the district a thing in more than name, a real active district, unquote, for the August setting meeting. So the prayers were answered and it was officially formed on September 25th, 1911. So as I mentioned earlier at 2, this is something kind of neat because the Kittitas Reclamation District, it formed and it wasn't a part of the Yakima project. It was just its own, would be its own irrigation district, just like the west side, Townsburg, Town Ditch, all the other systems. But this would change. So they filed notice for water appropriation for 12,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, irrigation of district lands with diversions in the Yakima River in the southeast northwest quarter of section 11, township 20, range 13, east, west, and green. Boundaries of the district were defined by the county commissioners. I thought that was interesting. The county commissioner is going to tell you where your district goes.
Did you say 12,000 or 1,200?
400. That's what they filed for. It doesn't mean that they diverted any water yet. See that that's what they filed for. And I'm always, if I have anything different, let me know. That's what I got from your website. So I got mine. Okay, so here's a picture. Anyone knows what this is? Anyone have a guess?
That's the canal.
Okay, this is where Easton Dam is today. This picture was in the collection at the office for Kittitas Reclamation District here in town. We had awesome glass plate negatives. I thought maybe this was from the original survey in 1909 done by E.H. Baldwin, because there was a series of photographs and taking pictures of this general area. But I did some research. I'm also a locomotive railroad historian, have been since I was 5. And so I looked at that one. That's a big Malley locomotive. But those weren't built till 1910, so this picture is taken a year later at least, if not more. It could be even 1911. So on October 3rd, 1911, KRD hires Frank Kelsey to survey an irrigation system, provide engineering data and cost estimates, which culminated in a report outlining the plan on March 15th, 1913. So Frank Kelsey, who was from Portland, Oregon, came up here and he surveyed all around. And so in anticipation of going to build this irrigation system, the KRD passed a $5 million bond for construction. Now you think about that's $5 million in 1911. A lot more money than today. It would be a lot of money. So they voted for it, and they voted 355 for the bonds and 24 against the proposed issue. In 1913, the KRD secures a Warren Act contract for 210,000 acre feet of water from the United States Reclamation Service. At this time, Ellensburg Chamber of Commerce starts raising funds for promotion and engineering costs for the Highline Canal to become a reality. While support was high locally and capital was short, the 1910s were slow for sales of bonds, even at a reduced rate. They even got down to selling bonds for half the price that it was before, but it still didn't sell. And then World War I made it even worse. By 1918, the United States Reclamation Service water contract lapsed because there was no irrigation system for KRD to withdraw water. Now, it'd be someone who was a government historian. I kind of know some of these things and some of them to be familiar with. So this Warren Act contract here, Okay, what this means is this is a private irrigation district that they can contract for water from the federal government. And by this time, they had Kittitas Dam built, they're working on Kittitas Dam, so they could say we want to secure water. It wasn't water for the reservoirs, just wasn't only for the reclamation built systems. People could contract with them, but they had to build a system and they did, so it lapsed. So what's the Kittitas Reclamation District to do now? What are they gonna do? They tried really hard. I want you, it's a short presentation, I don't have a lot of time, but I really want to implore you to realize how much the Chamber of Commerce did. They were continually fighting, doing publications, trying to raise money. I could never seen a Chamber of Commerce be so active in trying to get involved in the irrigation district to make it happen. But they just kept coming up short. So in 1918, the Kittitas Reclamation District Board meets with R.K. Tiffany, who was the project manager for the Aqua project. Yes, U.S. Senator Wesley Jones and Miles Poindexter to petition the United States Reclamation Service to build a system. They said, hey, we think you guys should build. And then in 1920, state of Washington's involved and has H.R. Bolton, engineer, investigate various proposed plans. From this, Kittitas Reclamation District hired engineer John R. Sherman to revise Frank Kelsey's original plans from 1912 1913. And then in 1921, Kittitas Reclamation District signs a new contract, this time for more water and 260,000 acre feet of water instead of 210,000. Again, as I mentioned, Ellsworth Chamber of Commerce steps up again, leads a Kittitas Valley community effort to describe monthly amounts, quote, monthly amounts to be paid until construction of canals of certainty, and even hired Orr McDermott, the engineer, to lobby the National Forest Service to build this project. So this lobbying wasn't done in vain. The interesting thing is that the federal government came and said, we have no money. So they continually petitioned them. F.A. Kern, KRD's new secretary, he had went to Washington, D.C. to personally lobby Arthur B. Davis, which is Reclamation's commissioner, see if we get money. So we don't have any money, don't have any money. At this time, Reclamation built projects, we talked about, they built all these projects throughout 17 western states. They were appropriated money and they had something set up called the Reclamation Fund. What that meant is the water users would then pay for operation and maintenance cost of their systems, and some of that money then would go back to Reclamation Fund and self-fund other projects. The problem that you had until 1924 with the Fact Finders Commission is a lot of these early projects failed. So you didn't have people who made money, could afford their lands. They had some projects prior to 1924 had 4 different ownerships until they actually made money on the land. So the decision of farmers failing. So the fund was less money. They tried to get appropriations. We can talk more about that later. I wrote a historic history of the Kittitas Reclamation District. But they got some other months, other ways to fill up through other means than just doing self-funding. So as I mentioned, finally in 1923, they got some more funding. Bureau of Reclamation said, we have some money. And they announced there would be money in the Reclamation Fund to build one more division of the Yakima project. And so now all of the different viable districts that will be planned for the Yakima project are all vying, pick me, I want to pick me. So they came out and they did a personal field trip by David W. Davis, Commissioner of Reclamation, and Frankie Wymuth, the agency's chief engineer, to see which would be the remaining plan that would be chosen. And so Kennewick was vying for that greatly. So was which would become eventually the Rose Irrigation District, but certainly Kennewick was. But luckily for Kittitas, they won out. They're the ones that were chosen. I'm doing a little history on the Kennewick Irrigation District. They were quite bummed they did not get that. They were really hoping on that, and they were just those darn Kittitas people beat us out. So in 1924, a draft report was finalized, estimated construction costs in Kittitas division would be $9 million, and was deemed worthy of construction and development by the government, unquote. And quote, while the repayment is long, the project is permanent and safe from an agricultural standpoint, exceedingly attractive from the viewpoint of health, educational, and social conditions, and considered economically sound and feasible. So now this was great news, and as I mentioned a little bit about the Fact Finders Act, nineteen twenty-four, that was another hurdle we had to go over, and then 1925 was the Interior Appropriation Act, which now required states to have a buy-in for these federal irrigation projects. So this was the first time in the state of Washington, and the state of Washington had to assume some financial responsibility for settlement and development of the proposed Kittitas division, which is a first for any reclamation project, as I mentioned here in Washington State. After much political wrangling, Governor Ronald H. Hartley added a limiting clause that the contract with Washington State would not have to pay more than $300,000 to help in settlement of the Kittitas division and include lands that they own. Besides opening new land, approximately 30,000 of those acres were already irrigated by natural flow from 9 creeks in the spring and early summer. Now provided with consistent season-long water. New lands irrigated were not just those owned by the Northern Pacific Railway, which had 3,900 acres. There are about 1,400 acres, I mentioned, owned by the state of Washington, and 5,000 acres owned by the federal government. To get an idea, so Northern Pacific Railway was a land grant, was a received payment $4 billion in Northern Transcontinental with grants for appropriations. They got every other section of land here in Washington State, every other section, all the way back to Minnesota. And so they had all this land that they would want to have developed and built. So we get to today. So here we are, 100 years ago. As I mentioned, the Kittitas division was approved in 1926. A third division annual project, talk about it's gonna be a 26.2 mile long main canal with 2 branches and a 36 mile long north branch and a 14.2 mile long south branch to irrigate Kittitas County. Near the end of the north branch canal is a little pumping plant that pumps water up to irrigate Badger Pocket, southeast Kittitas. And as we had picked this date, Sadie and I had, we wanted to talk a little bit about what happened. You see, there's all these jovial people in their straw hats and white shirts and ties and something going on up here. So, this is really something else. The government history, when I worked as a historian, the project history didn't really illuminate a lot of these things that went on. But they had opening ceremonies today in Easton at the start of the main canal. Title on the newspaper was, quote, "Great crowd attends happy ceremony." There was a special Northern Pacific train of over 200 people that came to the 11 a.m. ceremony, with 50 who came on a train from Seattle. Hundreds more came by automobile to the site. The Northern Pacific train from Ellsburg left at 9 a.m. sharp and cost $1.85 per passenger. So before they had the presentation and the speeches, there was a demonstration of the steam shovel and steam drag line showing how the canal was being excavated 1 hour before. That's some of the stuff that Sadie had posted earlier this week, where they were doing, even though technically this was official opening ceremony, they actually did start a few days before digging out some of the canal, I think, to get ready for this show. So Elmwood Mead, who was now the new commissioner of reclamation, presided over by F.A. Kern of the PRD, who said, quote, "A dream of 37 years is now fulfilled." Interesting enough, they had Portillo's, if I pronounced that correctly, Portillo's band of Cleon provided music. And Mead talked about the potential of the project, including work, which I thought was really interesting. He talked about growth of the small farms, development of the irrigated lands, what could happen. But he also said something that I found very interesting that was not talked about in the government records. So he talks about laying out roads and all these thousands of acres that the federal government owns. And he talks about putting down roads in Badger Pocket, roads that would be the shortest and best route possible to the towns and to the railway sidings. And the road should be smooth and dust-free as possible. I found that very interesting because I do know in my research, I did find in the Clown Basin project, they plan out lots of roads. Now, my dad, the parents are gone now, but my dad grew up in Ephrata, graduated from high school. We watched about how long straight those, when you go out there, the road is just straight like that. Why are they all straight? Well, that's because reclamation did that. All those engineers just laid out that, started the transit, said, oh, this road's gonna go here, and then they also have those, kind of boring names from but is there that they were doing that here at Badger Pocket? And they work with the Northern Pacific Railway for that too, to also facilitate the growth of good roads in Kittitas County. So we talked about it started in 1926 for construction. The main canal and south branch were completed first in 1929, but the north branch was not finished until 1931. And finalization of the lateral system, so these are all the branches off all these big canals, the north and the south branch and the main canal. And construction of the Whipple pumping plant and Badger Creek Wasteway continued to 1932 and through 1933, and a little bit of work on Badger Creek Wasteway in 1934. So we talk about the celebration. We had a celebration 100 years ago at Easton, but we had more than just one celebration. We had two celebrations. Second celebration came down here to Camola Hall at the normal school at the time, now we don't Central Washington University, where I'm an alumni. And so Meade also talked there. He gave more speeches to the out of town guests. So I expect these were the 50 people who came from Seattle and anyone else who was from out of the area. A luncheon was served along with the musical number provided by the Rodeo Ladies Quartet. Leon Sparks of the Ellensburg Chamber of Commerce welcomed guests. R.F. Walker, who was chief reclamation engineer for the Kittitas division, also spoke. And after the town celebration, guests went on an auto tour of the lower valley, showing those areas are reclaimed and what the Kittitas division could become. And to the right, that we see them already starting to trim rock, cut in preparation of the place in the concrete lining on the main canal. So here's one of these big dragline excavators, probably the one they saw this in Easton. They was taking that out. I noticed the size. The man here. Size to the bucket. Big monstrous steam dragline. And this is an interesting picture. So this picture, as I mentioned, taken from station number 37 on Uppercut, showing point of work done as well as machine and surrounding houses. You see in that photo. This was so popular, this picture was made into a postcard. So you could take a postcard, send it off to your friends. Look what's happening in the Kittitas Valley. Over 3.5 million cubic yards of earth were excavated for the main canal. Excavation crews worked 2 16-hour or 3 24-hour shifts to get the work done. Now, interesting enough, it went through Easton, and Easton today is not a large populous city, but it still had many people at the time, and that was, of course, Milwaukee Road came through there, and then the Northern Pacific did, and there was Turntable, and there was not just a division point, but a lot of activity there. But there was enough there that when they built the canal, they had to move 3 houses, 9 sheds, and a barn. Were moved by a gentleman named Mr. Ferrier as they're in the way of the canal. And Reclamation had to take out bite out of Easton for this and had to move 1,000 feet of their water. So just to focus on some of the canals, I want to talk a little bit about the main canal. So Reclamation didn't build it on its own. So Reclamation has some projects they built they call forced canal. The government was forced to do it. They couldn't do it any cheaper. One of those was the Company Dam up in Okanagan, where there at that time, that was built in 1905, 1910. Anything was shipped up to Wenatchee and then steamboat, and then up by Teamster to Cockinelli. So there was no roads, no railroad, whatnot. That was built before Stamp. But here it's different. Here many years later. So they constructed out, they contracted out and did construction with 6 different firms to build the main canal. And over 1,500 men were involved in construction of the main canal total over time. There was one fatality in construction. It was Jack Gladys, who was a gentleman from, I think, Roslyn, Upper County. That was interesting. That's something they don't talk about, but that it is something that does occur, especially in this era. But I believe that's the only fatality on the Kittitas division, Kittitas Reclamation District. I know on the roads there were 2. So the main canal, we talked about at least 3 construction camps for housing the workers. So 1,500 people. It wasn't like Reclamation where they had their own camp. And these construction camps are erected and operated by the contractor was above the average to circumference by the working man as to sanitary provisions. Wages for the workers varied from $300 a month for a superintendent with free room and board on the construction camp to 50 cents an hour for common labor. Those who did not get free room and board had to pay $150 a day to stay in a construction camp housing. I think, there's not a lot of records. I was speaking with the reporter with the Daily Record or article on this presentation, and we really don't know a lot about who was employed and who was not. I mean, we have some instances and some, maybe some family and local history that they worked on the project. But I do think, it's my conjecture, that there were quite a bit of local people that came and worked on it because they could just, at that time, the economy wasn't the greatest, it wasn't the Great Depression yet, but then it came and people would be looking for work. So here we see that they're building the form for, this is for Peterson siphon, so all that wood involved, look how they're bending the wood to make the siphon go up and down. There's another one. And this is the completed view zone, and if you notice, we were talking, I'm gonna jump around about how steep some of these are, here's one part of the siphon goes down here, right back up like that.
Do you know where that's located?
Oh, it's on the main canal. How far is it from Nelson Siding? Urban, do you know?
Close to the golf course.
Close to the golf course.
Peterson?
Yeah.
7-7, yeah.
So, and not only did they use, machinery like we saw, so giant steam power generators, but we also use horses, and this is one of the last projects in the Yakima project that was built with horsepower, so you have horses here using a compactor. Of course, we have the giant drag line. I always like this picture because it shows how massively huge this is. Here's big. But we had horsepower. We had lots of use of horsepower. So we can see that, you know, we have horses, they're being used for compacting canal embankments, pulling rollers over the earth, we saw that, plowing in the canal prisms, smaller laterals, and pulling skips of concrete, makes on you see on the terminal lateral in Badger Fog. And so, as we mentioned, originally this project was supposed to be $9 million. And those that came, to my talking to, you realize there was a problem. Eventually it came out and it cost $11 million to build this after the pressure turned to fail in 1931 because they had to fix it. So that would be equivalent to 182,686 million and 118.42 cents, 118, so over 182 million today. It cost 11 million to build back in 1926 to 1933. So it's a massive undertaking, and I always like to give those figures as a historian. I learned a long time ago, you got to what inflation is. What is it today? It doesn't sound like much today, but back then that's $182 million to do it today. So not only did we have excavators, we had steam shovels, we had there was drag lines, and we had horses. We also had tunnels, and you had several tunnels. They were hauled out. They had little tunnel electric locomotives. There was a gasoline powered one here. We see this at Rocky Point Tunnel. You know, all kinds of activity. And then, as I mentioned, we also had something unique to this project was we also had graveled soils. They're compacted together. They could not break with available technology. An excavator or a drag line below a foot, so we couldn't break it below a foot. So hard. And so they required considerable dynamite. You see that there, they just showed out the charges. And the dynamite then would uplift this ground, but it still was huge. They had to keep pounding it with the dragline bucket just to break it up. This hard pan could be hauled off. You see how big that is if we point to the man. So we talk about machinery, we talk about animals, but we also have manpower. This is a series of photographs that the Irrigation District has, which are really cool. These are ones that are not part of Reclamation's assigned photograph set, but they show the human element involved in this. So every day during the construction of the Kittitas Reclamation District's Kittitas Division in the canal, Antelope Canal System, a trainload of gravel crossed the mountains from Steilacoom, and every week a trainload of cement came from Washington cement plants, with trainloads of steel arriving for steel mills. I don't know if you can notice this, but these guys are taking individual steel bars out of this control and rolling it down here, and it's going over there. And the caption on this was unloading 3-inch reinforcing steel for canal lines. Imagine how long it took them to unload that gondola of steel from Pennsylvania. So, and then we see the sand and gravel dumpster in Easton. And they were transferred to there. And we talk about camp. So here's a nice picture. There's all the information on it because they were all run by the different private companies that are contract. Reclamation was see the camp here, near Dry Creek Siphon. There were over 1,600 workers on the payroll of the contractors at this peak of construction of the canal. And it involved all kinds of unusual things for technology. So to me, this seems unusual. This is what they of course created siphons with all these forms, these wood forms. Not unusual, but Kittitas division involved more types and different forms of canal sections than any irrigation plant yet constructed in this country, or probably more. Probably one of the most expensive, covering so large an acreage when it was built. So the main canal has one tunnel under the now BNSF tracks and 10 siphons. The North Branch Canal has 5 tunnels and 7 siphons. South Branch Canal has 2 tunnels and 5 siphons. And this was the last Yakima project division that was constructed with a manual concrete canal lining machine. The main canal had a motor operated machine to move the jumbo, but it was not fully automatic and did not form the concrete people were still used. We'll talk about that. So this is the machine that was developed in Seattle by the general contracting company called the Kittitas Valley. This machine was used, and I don't know if you can see how, we're gonna show some different photos of this, just different examples. They modified it, changed it, different contractors said, this is really cool. So they did the same thing, whatever they could do, because before this, they did it all by hand. There's pictures I found down in the Sunnyside division, the Sunnyside Canal, they enlarged it in 1909 and 10, and they all did it by hand. They didn't have any sort of machine that would bring down concrete here and put it into a wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow come over and dump it down here and go down this chute, and then it'll go here, and then it should be slowly winched up by these gentlemen up the side there. So then this would change from just being rebar and dirt to being a completed concrete panel. So here's some other pictures of that. So I mean, it is automated, but it's still a lot of hand use, a lot of manpower involved in it. You got either this one goes to this side, and that one goes to that side. Here's on the North Branch Canal. And so then we have all these siphons we talked about. Here's Spexar siphon. It's 423 feet long. It's one of 17 concrete siphons that goes under creeks in the main canal. It constituted an outstanding example of modern engineering and construction resourcefulness. Here's the culmination section near Morrison Canyon siphon. Of course, this is empty. And it's there, standing there for proportion. You notice that there are trapezoidal lined high wall bench flumes, half wall and rock sections, flumes with half straight angle sections, drop structures, and earthen line sections. So it's all these different types of things that compose the main canal. And no other Yakima project division has such a variety of design. And that's true of the ones built afterward. Rosa, Ganaway, nothing like this. My favorite is Morrison Canyon siphon. It's 552.3 feet long. It's a really cool riveted siphon. And that's the steel portion. The whole siphon itself is 1,049 feet long. There's a concrete portion on that. It's one of 2 riveted steel siphons in the main canal. And as I mentioned, no other Yakima project division has these steel siphons.
Why are they called Morrison Canal?
Morrison Canyon. That's the canyon that it crosses. That's the question more for the local folks, who did why it's called Morrison Canyon. I'm not sure. There's Morrison Canyon, and the other one is that Horseshoe Canyon. And those are upstream of this, Yakima pressure tunnel. So, as I mentioned, the 2 located between main canal and the North Branch Canal is a reinforced and plain concrete line tunnel located about 8 miles northwest of Ford. The Yakima pressure tunnel is 3,596 feet long, and internal diameter of 111 inches. It delivers 925 cubic feet per second of water from the south side of the Yakima Canyon to the north side of the Kittitas Valley. When built, it went under 2 railroads, the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul Pacific, and the North Pacific Railway, along with the Yakima River, Swat Creek, and Highway 10. One of the unique features is this rock trap and sand traps on the inlet. This only siphon type in the Yakima project was built with such a rock trap. The Rosa division does have a lot of siphons, but no rock traps. The automatic waste that we see here is shown operation on July 26, 1931. And also known as a movie camera. Less than a month later, this photo was taken, the pressure trencher had unexpected failure, but that's another presentation. Well, you two got to see that. Save it for next time. Okay. Easton Dam is a concrete gravity dam with an OG weir and movable crest. It's the only one of its type in the Aqua project. So again, another unique thing about the Kittitas Reclamation District, that is the only type of dam on the whole project. I don't know if it's the only one in the United States. I know it's not the only one in the agency, there was in the 70 West States, but it's very unique. So with all of this and the use of concrete, Reclamation had to come up with an idea. They had over half of that cost, $9 million, was in concrete. That's a lot of concrete. And so they had to figure out, where are we gonna test it? What's the best mixture? How's the right thickness? One of the things that came out, I found in reports, is that they lined these canals. We talked about the lining machine, and they lined it. It's about 2.5 inches or so, I think, 2.5 inches. Afterwards, you realize, oh, we should have done 3. So they didn't line up, but they had this testing laboratory in the Pearson building over, that way. Reclamation had 160 employees here working on various things, and they were measuring the impermeability of the concrete. Concrete discs are used as specimens for testing, and this is in the testing laboratory. And here's gentlemen here, all the rebar sections. So they had so much concrete, and they built a lot of this system, not only with, we talked about big concrete siphons, we talked about tunnels, we talked about metal siphons, but they also built things with lock joint concrete pipe. And so they had all this pipe, and some of they couldn't do this part, they actually did do by government employees, government account, Gulf Force account. It was built on remains, the Kittitas Valley lumber company sawmill and lumberyard site, adjacent to the Milwaukee Road Railroad. It produced all the concrete pipe needed for the Kittitas division to be installed by contractors. It produced 50,000 linear feet of pipe that was either culvert or pressure pipe. Pipe varying diameter from 18 inches to 72, so there's still the 72. Complex compact arrangement for construction, curing, and transport of the pipe. There was something to behold. They had this facility. So here it is. You see the Milwaukee Road tracks. This Milwaukee Road was electrified in this part. There it is right there. And this is where the sawmill was, and they Reclamation made it into their concrete pipe making plants. So there's one picture there. Here's another one here. She's a curing yard, all completed pipe on the right.
So is this close to where the old depot is now?
No, this is a question that I had Hunt out earlier, was curious about. It turns out it's near Central Washington University. There's a pond that's still there. This was a sawmill, but all that stuff is gone. I have it located in a map. I'll bring it up as it was, but we did figure out where it was at. But you wouldn't know because no one kind of knew where it is. I don't want me to say, without looking at that, to misspeak and say what street it was off of, but we did find out where it went. To these things, they rented it. Yes.
There's a pond here where the CW surplus.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's the spot. And so the lock, as I mentioned, the lock joint pipe plant was constructed in 1928. The lock joint pipe was adapted as a standard concrete pipe by Reclamation, so they could not contract it out. So Reclamation kind of had 100-day rights to that. That's also when they built it. So here we see some of that lock joint pipe in action being used. This is near Johnson Creek Raceway. This actually has come down. The hillside underneath Interstate 90 would go there behind that little hill, and it's come up that way. It's all put together. Here's a completed canal, the main canal in 1929, shows all the concrete line in there. So now they built the canal. Got to bring people come. Got to make them be the ones here. Interesting enough, Kittitas Reclamation District and the Kittitas Division, the Yakima Project, is also unique in that it was the first division that offered preferential treatment to veterans for land. So they divided up the land, and they had 63 farm units. And in 1933, they gave veterans preference for that. You didn't have that in the Sunnyside or the Titan divisions. This was a first. But also we had lots of campaigning, and city's done a nice job of the exhibit out there. This is the brochure from the walking road now. Don't be confused, it was meant to be folded over, but this is the flat rate was I found it in recommendations, and the state of Washington has it also copied in Tacoma. But they produced all kinds of brochures, they did reclamation, information concerning the Kittitas Division and Yakima project. They want to make sure people knew what they were gonna get into and encourage themselves to come to the Kittitas Valley to take advantage of this new land with, now that has water. So, starting in 1926, Ellensburg Chamber of Commerce was head of a multi-year publicity campaign raised by local donations that attracted over 1,000 inquiries per month from nearly 60 magazine and newspaper classified ads. So, the Chamber of Commerce was really promoting this. And we just talked about both the Northern Pacific and the Milwaukee Road, that's what this brochure is from. Gave her $1,000 in advertising to this campaign. Imagine what that is today, that's a lot of money. Milwaukee Road even published a 32-page 4-color booklet in 1932. Even though the Kittitas Division was open for settlement during the darkest days of the Great Depression, starting in 1930 to 32, when agriculture was particularly hit hard, the area was settled more rapidly than any other early divisions of the Yakima project. And when he talks about, he was really pleased how quickly this settled and had people who were qualified to farm. We had a lot of people, I don't know where you folks are all from, as mentioned, I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian. I mean, a friend many decades ago, Beulah Kerr, and her husband came west from North Dakota in the Great Depression because they lost their farm. They had nothing to eat, they eat prickly pear cactuses, and she told me this story. It's a rabbit trail, but I think it's worth telling again. So they had a wheat farm in North Dakota. They lost it all. They came out to the Yakima Valley because they could get jobs there. And husband went to work in the orchard and he came home and he was just starved. She said, "What's wrong? Why are you so hungry?" And he said, "Well, they didn't feed me lunch." She said, "What? They didn't feed you lunch?" "Well, because I'm a wheat threshing crew and my family go wheat farmers. You fed people lunch. That was part of the deal, but not here. You went to go pick apples. You had to bring your own lunch." So you had a lot of people in the Depression come here because Washington State was seen a place where you could get employment. So then we have people that start out, and here they're gonna start this in Badger Pocket. They're gonna break the ground with a tractor. And then the other part is the upper county. So here you got stumps. So there's a lot of cover land. Some was owned by the state of Washington along the main canal. They blasted those out with stumps. Here's a little settler's cabin came. Its caption says, "New farm home on the Kittitas Division." That's hard, got a tractor. But it's a tiny home, their home back then.
A little different than the brochure.
Yes. Broken land, broken raw land in foreground, it said. Definitely broken. Here's the plow team. So as the valley started to develop, it has land getting broken, like you say, not like the brochure said. I always think of what's interesting, I live in Montana now, my wife found this brochure from the state of Montana, issued in 1914, and said every creek in Montana has gold on it. So this was Aaron, we still get some today of, grandiose, publications that they don't tell you the truth. But this is one that actually is telling you the truth. This is very interesting. This is from the Reclamation era. And this is titled Reclamation Project Women and Their Interests. And what they are interested in. And this article is written by Olive Schnebley, who is a Kittitas Division farm wife. And she talks about the beautification of the Kittitas Valley with trees, because we're now adequate water with the Kittitas Division. So KRD is helping with trees. And I want you to know that they said women's clubs spread the word about the correct shrubs and trees to plant. And to my surprise, it said in here, quote, "Every Ellensburg homeowner has been given a street planting of the same kind of tree," unquote. So with this extra water and the green of the valley, they're really focused on planting trees, beautification, and people are planting the right kinds of shrubs, but will survive them in the climate there. And I thought it was very interesting that that's what the article was written about, was shrubbery. So we have production already early on. This is an exhibit from 1932 at the local fair here. It was awesome. If you guys never get to go, if you're not from here or you're new to town, go to the Kittitas County Fair. Got Liberty Weekend. It's really a great place to be. Wonderful little fair. And here's all the crops that grew off of reclamation land already by September 1932. This was put together by a committee from John Koreski, Arthur Penderson, Rover German, and Claude Catton. And they had so much produce, they didn't have enough space. Now we're gonna see some of the stuff they grew here, which I thought was very interesting because this project came early on. They were transformed. We saw that barren, raw sagebrush land. And what did they grow? Well, here they are growing potatoes, carrots. There was another one, I don't have the photo of it here, but the South Branch Councilman grew cucumbers. Here's someone growing sweet corn, how tall that is. This field belongs to Guy Merchland. And while his field is below the Cascade Canal, only a small portion of property within the Highline District. This field averages 4 tons per acre of corn. Here's oats. Did anyone see the man in the picture? Look at that. These oats are so tall, they're up to here. That's some tall oats. Yes. And here's one. Here's the Koreski farm. Here's his field of carrots. This is the first crop after clearing this. So they cleared all that land. Here's what they produced in the Badger Pocket. 1932. Here's Arthur Penderson, his field of potato crops. This is his first crop, also in the Badger Pocket. And here's Koreski's pea field. So they grew peas here. I had no idea they grew peas. And there's a picture of Walter Koreski and the Badger Pocket area. And this is fun because this one here has the little card, so the Irrigation District. And it says that he's in it, and it gives more detail, where it's near Kittitas. Yeah, I talked about this in a presentation I gave several years ago. It's very interesting because in the official government description of that just says pea fields in Badger Pocket. So the local card is great because it tells you who it was and where it was at, and more details information. It did interesting say something different. These are perfection peas raised for seed, and the yield was 70 bushels per acre. Yeah, 7 bushels. So here's someone growing cabbage. It's on the west side near Ellsworth, is the Barnes Farm. Someone growing onions. There's an onions, field of onions, Badger Park, near Kittitas. Here's someone cutting the second crop of alfalfa in Badger Pocket. And we see here, it's AC Cressy, that's that correctly, and he's standing. Here's the OS Johnson farm, they're binding wheat. Back here, okay, so we talked about settlement on this, and so reclamation projects are very interesting, very complex, keeping up with the times and change in agriculture. Settlement on the Kittitas division followed a contract at no more than a maximum of 160 acres per individual. Because you only have 160 acres. Now, people got around that because I bring my wife along and then both of us get 160 acres, so we have 320. But the economic change in agriculture after World War II forced farmers to acquire more land to increase production and remain profitable. Here in the Kittitas Valley, by the 1940s and 1950s, there were several landowners who had more than 320 acres, and KRD had to notify those farmers. They had to reduce their holdings due to reclamation, vigorously pursuing a campaign to eliminate violations of the 160 acre limitation. Eventually, you see changes in the Columbia Basin project with the 1943 Columbia Basin Act, where they had to extend that because it just wasn't viable. Sad, but it's just true. For my master's thesis, I talked about the intensely irrigated orchard tracts of Yakima Valley and how originally in there you could say it was like 5 acres would make you the husband and wife could support yourself and 2 kids, and 20 acres make you independent for life, they said. But by the time World War II came along, you couldn't make it unless you have about 160 acres, and not even that wasn't enough. You had to have more than that. Now it's hundreds of thousands. But certainly with small scale farming. Which reclamation promoted, but got behind the times, with acreage and the amount of acreage needed to, be profitable. So as we talk about that, and I interjected there, but by 1945, the average size of a Kittitas County farm, including those on the Kittitas Reclamation District, Kittitas Division, is 548 acres. By 1969, the average size of farms in all of Kittitas County is 710 acres. Don't know what it is now, but I'm sure it's considerably more than that. So on January 2nd, 1934, so we have a celebration today. First shovel full of dirt, and Elmwood Mead comes out, gives great presentations and says, hey, this is great, you know, we're gonna be wonderful. Reclamation builds it, operates it, turns it over on January 2nd, 1934. To no fanfare, no press, no band, no group of people by a train. It was just handed over, and the O&M maintenance of the Kittitas Division will now be handled by a much smaller staff than the construction forces. The office staff in that date in 1934 consisted of 4 people. Vern R. Russell was manager. Ronald E. Rudolph was secretary. Gaylord Sterling was accountant. And Mrs. Gladys Merchland was a bookkeeping operator. Now, she was the head of the game for AI because she was one of the only few who knew how to operate the special bookkeeping machine that was built for KRD. So she had a shoe in there to be able to work. Both Russell and Rudolph were former reclamation engineers and clerks who left the agency to be working for KRD. There were 17 employees for operation of the canal system in 1934, KRD employees, which included ditch riders, dam tender, pumping plant operator, etc., and nearly 30 for the O&M crew. We see they're still working today. So earlier too, I was blessed by getting one of these wonderful bright yellow KRD t-shirts years ago. And that's what they're still doing today. I've traveled, I don't know, we would say 1,000 miles to show roads and ditch riders, but they do a great job. And I just want to really encourage you to be kind to your ditch rider. He's working hard and trying to do what's right. I was always amazed. Not on this project, but other ones that I wrote on where the ditch rider was in the car and I was doing work for the agency. And I was right along and had to sit there while the guy was dealing with the customer, had great customer service. I was just amazed. Because then I heard the backstory after they left and I was like, wow. And then we had ones who always had to deal with all kinds of unusual problems. Not here, thankfully, on the Kittitas Division, but down in Southern Oregon, there is the Talent Division of the Rogue River Project. And I was out with the ditch rider one day and he said, we're going through there. And there they've got canals of all kinds of names, 4 or 5 different names. But one was the East Low, so the East Canal, the East Lateral. Anyways, it's got multiple names. I said, we had to open all these gates. Unlike this one, they have gates across all the ditch rider. Well, that's happened. What did he do? And he pulled out his keys, and had this big wad of keys. And I'm like, wow. I said, you got keys for everyone's gates? Yep. He says, I got keys for every day. Because I got to get this open. And I said, well, what do you do if you don't have keys? He says, I have a universal key. I said, what is that? He said, goes in the back of the truck and pulls out a bolt cutter. Cuts that lock and opens that gate. So the ditch riders trying to do their job, make sure you guys get the water in a timely fashion. And as Mark Twain said, remember, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over. So water is an important thing for us to keep flowing and keep it moving. So we talked about that it was turned over in 1934, but the main canal headworks and dam tender's house was taken back by reclamation in December 1940. So they let Kittitas Reclamation District manage it, and then 6 years later they took it back. And until April 5th, 1960, when reclamation returned owning this project back to KRD.
When was it?
I don't know. They didn't talk about that. What was interesting is that it was good for KRD because in June of 1944, Easton Dam failed. And it also let down water. 12 feet of water dropped out of Lake Easton. And it flooded the Yakima River and increased water levels a foot to 2 feet in places. So they had a massive failure. But I don't know, it makes you wonder because you know what, is, you know, they were inklings with World War II, you know, they think, was there something going on there, is the national security. You know, Easton is a diversion dam, it's not a high dam, you know, it's taking the water that comes out of the reservoirs and diverting it, but certainly for KRD, it was great that they didn't have it in 1944, so it wasn't their fault. But this did occur, so we had O&M, and O&M is something that KRD does on a daily basis, the ditch riders are out working on it, and then they have the maintenance crew and they deal with things. And it's pretty much uneventful. Except sometimes when something really goes awry. So in 1953, we had a landslide caused by breaking the main canal, which caused 150 feet of the hillside to come down the Milwaukee Road tracks. Below the canal, carrying earth and trees to a depth of 5 feet or more, blocking the road for 24 hours. A 200-foot scar on the hillside was left from the landslide, which blocked both passenger and freight trains. Rail was in danger of a complete washout as water was coming down the 300-foot high, quote, precipitous hillside in streams in places, so just streams of water coming down, until the canal was closed off. KRD used the 1146 wasteway to divert all water into the canal, into the river. A 4-foot by 8-foot section of the canal line settled, turns out, when a 1 to 1/2 inch wide crack developed around the section where the water leaked. The line was broken up and removed by the KRD drag line and patched to prevent further seepage. On July 30th, it happened again. This time, the KRD caught the 75-foot long crack in the Santa Canal that was leaking water before another landslide happened. As before, the floor of the section was removed and temporarily patched to prevent further seepage. Once water was turned off after irrigation season was over, the KRD maintenance crew replaced the entire section of line in the main canal. KRD, with the help of the U.S. Soil Conservation Service, also built 100 feet below the main canal, 1,300-foot long, 12-inch diameter tile drainage line to carry out any seepage. Now, tell you all that, actually, this is the Elmsburg Daily Record, big article, and because of the scan, unfortunately, you can't see, there's an excavator there, I think it's maybe the Milwaukee Road there, trying to clear off all the dirt, everything all around the tracks, and stuff that came down the hillside. This was the report that was submitted to Reclamation of the project history. I found this very interesting. It states that what happened in the Kittitas Division for the year 1953. Says 2 breaks occurred in the line section below 1146 during the season, both of which were repaired. Spilling of water at station 1146. End of quote. That's all they said. So after World War II, we talked about this in 1953. What happened in the Kittitas Reclamation District? So 1949, originally this project was to be 72,000 acres. It was reduced to 59,000 acres, which is at today. And the contract with Reclamation extended to 2037, an extra 88 years. A lot of these reclamation projects, they estimated how many acres could be irrigated, but it turns out over time that estimation is usually off slightly and needs to be reduced. That's what they had here because it wasn't feasible, where the ground was bad soil, you know, there wasn't people that were interested. There are a lot of reasons that they reduced the size of these. By the 1960s, we have interstate highway system, you know, but massive highway that's across our nation, even today, of course. And then later, Interstate 82. Then they take a combined strip of land 10 miles long and 300 feet wide out of the irrigation project. So here they reduce the acreage to 59,000 acres, but then the interstate system comes along and takes more acreage out. Manager dealer Earl Sterling at the time then said that every 8 1/4 foot of right of way means 1 acre of irrigable land taken out of production or every mile the highway goes through a district. In 1971, Gaylord Sterling retires as secretary manager, having worked for KRD since January 1st, 1934. In 1975, the gauging station was built as a joint venture between KRD and Reclamation. Now, I want you to know, so KRD is to help build the gauging station. What do you think Reclamation contributed for that? 1975. Any guess? Found it interesting. They contributed a door and a roof. So that's all they did. So they helped out, but not a lot. So we talk about I-90, I want to go back here and revisit things. So along South Branch Canal, it would cut into the original siphon. So Washington Highway Department had 400 feet of the siphon redone by contract with the new 17.8-inch diameter concrete pipe buried deeper to avoid the interstate was being built in 1965. So that was a change to South Branch Canal. In 1968, the construction of I-82, Yakima, which still took a lot longer, take a chunk out of the turbine and Whipple pump laterals. Also necessary to complete rerouting of the Whipple pump and turbine laterals should be relocated in pipes for 10,000 feet parallel to the new highway. So now we get in the 1970s. 1970s, we have issues of drought. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but I remember by then I was a young child. Or maybe yeah, where Rimrock went dry, yeah, residents went completely dry. And so we had continued years of that, we had issues. And so in 1979, Congress authorized the Yakima River Basin Watershed Advancement Project for reclamation to work with Washington State to develop a plan to meet the needs of irrigation, treaty rights, and aquatic life after several years of drought. Water rights and conflicts in the Yakima Basin. And so Yard Web, in the 1980s, KRD installed a new fish ladder under phase 1 of the Yard Wetland project. This is done as part of a basin-wide program to reduce Dramas fish mortality and update the fish ladders at diversion dams and integrate fish screens and diversion canals. This is followed by water conservation and stream flow projects, which became established in 1994 as a way to address these issues. So we're going to talk about some fun stuff that KRD is doing today. So as we mentioned, Main Canal crosses all kinds of creeks. Here's a creek at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And so it crosses these all the way in, and they built these segments. And interesting enough, in history, sometimes people long ago would do things like, why would you do that? But they cut off things wrong. But Tucker Creek, here's an example, and they did build an apron over. So you see, here's the siphon going down and over, and they built this little concrete apron for the creek. So they didn't cut off water flow, but it still was somewhat hard for fish to grow up and go over. Here it is, here's that apron, here's the canal coming down like that. And I was talking to Erwin today, he said that this creek didn't already have a lot of water in it, so. What the KRD has done is they've worked with other parties and they've developed kind of ways to, through the Yard Work program, enhance viability of fish and other aquatic life. And so they created this, which I thought was really cool. They built a fish ladder over this, and they provided water to the creek below and below downstream. And so now the fish can go through this pattern all the way up over the top. So at that same area with this fish ladder, which is really cool, and it runs Walker Creek. There's not the only one that KRD is working on. They've done Big Creek and Little Creek, because they're big, strong siphons. We talked about, they have a lot of pressure. They take the water out of the siphon just a little bit, and turn out and divert it into the creek, and then later on from the ladder provide full flow water to the Yakima River for the length of these creeks. Tatum Creek and Nashash Creek, they also take water from the siphon and provide flow for the creeks. And future projects include Swap Creek, where the Yakima River pressure tunnel is, and take water from that pressure tunnel and bring water 3.5 miles upstream to provide full flow there. So besides providing some flow for the creeks, streams, and hence aquatic life and fish, they're also doing water conservation measures. So as mentioned, concrete, a lot of it, 50% of the cost of the Kittitas division was in concrete, but it's not all concrete. So they've been a program that KRD has been doing for many years of taking and lining canals. I think you guys, everyone you line with the geomembrane, you put concrete over, correct? Yes, okay. Some districts don't, they just put this on, that's not good. You need to have this over there. I can say that they don't work for BC. I work on my own. So that's what you see here, so they're putting in the lining, and then they're gonna cover it with concrete, and here's a part of Junction Peak Raceway. So doing things to help conserve water. So KRD has returned over 11,000 acre feet of water to help meet the Yard Web goals in the Yakima River since 2014 alone. With continued upgrades to KRD systems, it's lining along with piping and laterals to reduce evaporation and water seepage and other water conservation measures. Long-term plans for the KRD include a new dam and reservoir in Elk Heights, which take water from Easton via the main canal to a storage reservoir that could release water back in the Yakima River when needed. And the KRD is also partnering with others to build a bull trout research and recovery facility at Easton diversion dam on reclamation property. The last thing I want to say, and I wasn't paid to say this, so I'll just speak. Urban and Kevin, the KRD up today has really worked hard to improve their system too. I saw that when I worked for the AC, that they were always trying to do something better. What can we do to conservation? make it so we can provide water for everyone, all the water users. And get, alternative ways to fix it, because people don't realize how much these cost, these are very, very expensive. So these projects really need a lot of funding, and unfortunately, the funding is not there. I saw that where I live now in Montana, they had a massive failure on the Milk River project, they had a big, I think it was a twin siphon steel one, built over 100+ years ago, and it failed. Man, what do we do now? And so these projects do need to have maintenance and upkeep, and I just want to give kudos to the staff today at KRD for all the work they're doing in trying to help improve their system and keep it running. And keep delivering the water that needs to for farmers. And that is the end of my presentation, so. Any questions? No one has any questions, I'll give you a little fun story. Yes, sir.
Exhibit two.
Yes, please, check out the exhibit, and, I've been remiss not telling you, there are 2 clipboards out there. There's a special tour that KRD is offering, you should go check out for the area. And they're gonna develop the reservoir, correct, John? The tour is gonna be okay, out there, I was thinking where the Stuart Anderson Ranch is, everyone remember where that used to be, the Stuart Anderson Ranch. And they're gonna offer that on the 7th, in 2 times. Definitely go for it, it's really amazing, you think of these things, and I grew up in the Yakima Valley, you have irrigation canals all over the place. It's just commonplace, but you don't realize how they work, what they look like, when you get to see them up close, it's well worth going to, so I encourage you to sign up for that and take that tour. I think that's really gonna be something that's worth going to, and you can see what they do, and what the plans are, and what the area looks like, and can't help but see it in front. So, as Sadie has mentioned, I gave a talk here, gosh, maybe a decade, no, I think it was 2019. On one of the things that we all have our different hobbies and interests. I have a vintage fruit labels that they use here in the Northwest, like the turn of the 1960s. So I always like to put in something fun at the end of the presentation. And so, can anyone guess why this says mascot? There's a boy and his dog. So the story goes, I interviewed many 2nd-generation apple orchardists and growers and packers, gone, my 35 years of collecting. This is done by a gentleman who was a sales manager for Richie Gilbert. And 2 stories. One was the story that it was a bet at a party that he couldn't get to this brand he created. And I said he did it, I don't know, but they actually still use this today. Richie and Gilbert, there's now Gilbert Orchards, they split in 1947. But Gilbert Orchards still has licensed brand, but this is called mascot brand, so it's a boy and his dog, okay? Well, it's more than that. See his pants? My ass is caught. And if you look closer, what is he doing? He's stealing apples from the tree on the other side of the water. And so that's the story that goes for that. The other term back in that era before the advanced controlled atmosphere storage that we have today was that if you still had apples in June and you were having some, and then comes July and it comes August, well then your ass is caught with all this fruit you still got in storage, you got a new crop coming up. But this is a very minuscule label, and this was created for their C grade fruit, which we don't have around here anymore today. They had different grades, they had extra fancy for the top tier premium grade, they had fancy for the average grade, good grade, and this was C grade, so my wife always wants to call it cosmetically challenged, but it was good apples, there was nothing wrong with it. They just weren't the premium king of the crop, but they sold a lot of stuff back in the Midwest, so I was really surprised. I did research on a orchard operation in Montana, and they are competing with apples that are being flooded into Bismarck, North Dakota from Yakima. And all the Yakima guys are flooding our market with apples, cartloads of apples. But that's, and then someone had their hand up back there. Did anyone else have a question? Yes.
I just had a question for PRD, with future projects, and environmental impacts like lateral being pipe and has to be the local systems and your uses, for example. I'm off the South Branch. We have those questions.
I can answer that question. I'll go up front so we can. Hi, everybody, I'm Urban, and the question was about conservation and the impact on some of those upland artificially created and sustained wetlands or cottonwood trees or willows or grasses, whatever you want to, whatever those plants are that are on the sagebrush rim around the valley that are there because of this canal system was constructed, and ever since construction, it leaks. And in fact, as part of the original design, when you have those line sections, it was a drain system under there, it was designed to leak. That was a way to protect the concrete. And oftentimes you would go around corners and draws, and especially that's where you would find those trees. And what we are doing with this program, we're part of a multi-billion-dollar plan, 30-year plan. And one of the key pieces of that is water conservation. And when we were, I've been working on this stuff, making trips to Washington DC as early as the late 1980s. And we were working on the legislation. Kelsey mentioned 1994 legislation. So 79 was the first one, 94, and then we just did phase 3.
Yeah,
Years ago. In the 94 legislation, we started focusing on water conservation. That was under the Clinton administration, and people weren't really talking about surface storage anymore. They said, well, why don't you guys do a bunch of conservation and then you can talk about storage, see if you can solve your problem with conservation. We're talking about storage now, but then we were working on conservation. As part of that, we knew that we were going to dry up those artificially created and sustained wetlands up on those hillsides that were not there naturally before development. And they do actually, they're at locations where are not in the usual transportation corridors for the fish and wildlife species, obviously. They usually would come out of the river, follow the creeks up, and then get up into the higher elevations. These are scattered around in unusual places. So what we decided to do was to make up for all of those plants that we knew that were going to die by protecting water in those protecting the stream corridors and the river system. Perfect example was the very first thing we did was we purchased the Shockey packing plant, got it all cleaned up. There are berms, there were levees there too. So now we have, starting there, right behind the Ellensburg wastewater treatment plant, we took those levees out and then moved them over and put in berms. So right now, starting at where Shockey was, whenever the river gets to a certain elevation, that water will spread out onto that ground, soak into the ground. But that was just that piece. So then as part of our program, we were able to purchase the Stewart property, the Moore property, and then we continued on down and now have contiguous ownership through various owners working with different partnerships from Shockey all the way down to the mouth of the Yakima. That will now become a low elevation forest again, which is cottonwoods and all that habitat. Water will be spread out, and that's all being restored thanks to Kittitas County and floodplain by designs and our integrated plan process. So that actually was one of the places that was intended to be mitigation for those upland artificially created and sustained wetlands that are going away. An example of putting that water back to where it historically had been. Those creeks that Kelsey mentioned we're putting water in. So the water that we are saving, now you'll see that Menashkash Creek had been going dry for about a century for a 3.5 mile stretch centered right around Cove Road and on down before it became a gaining reach. It was just hot rocks every summer, 2 or 3 months out of the summer, maybe 3 or more sometimes. You'll now see that there is flow in the Menashkash Creek continuously. We've opened up 28 miles of mid-Columbia steelhead and others threatened and extirpated species habitat up in the Yakima Canyon. Kelsey mentioned we're doing the same thing on Tainham Creek, Big Creek, Little Creek, Tucker Creek. We're headed over to Swat Creek next on our way around. And the goal is to get those corridors back to closer to how they were before, with water flowing, shade, food for those species, both birds and fish that are able to be open to them so they can get out of the hotter valleys in the summertime, head up and then hang out up in those mountains. So it's taking the molecules that have been leaking, putting habitat in places that were just little islands, but not in the corridors, and focusing the water on what those species have known since they've evolved here of where they need to be. It's a real cooperative program where we're doing the lining and the piping in the canals, and those are drying up, but we're able to make better deliveries to the farms. At the same time, we're making better habitat for these in threatened and endangered species, and bringing back those species that have already been that have been extirpated. So our plan is to really protect the economy and the ecosystem into the next couple of centuries, doing it one project at a time. So it's actually a benefit. It looks bad in that one spot, but it's a benefit for the entire Yakima River system and the Columbia River system as well, because we're working on bringing those fish back to the basin that had almost disappeared.
That's impressive.
That's it. Thanks.
So please take a look. I know it's closing time. I think you're closed, right? We can go look around. Okay, but I helped Sadie. She did a nice exhibit on irrigation here. Revamped the whole thing. Take a look at it. There's a beautiful blue. There's some wonderful historic photographs, a bit of history there. You can learn about the irrigation in Kittitas Valley. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.